You probably recall that in last Sunday's gospel, Jesus was on a mountaintop, and he was there with Satan, and he was tempted there by Satan. In today's gospel, Jesus is on another mountaintop. This time he's with Moses and Elijah, where he is glorified with them. There's a great contrast between these two mountains. And from this mountaintop, Jesus looks ahead to another hilltop called Mount Calvary, where he will be crucified. And it notes in our gospel text that Jesus and Moses and Elijah spoke of his exodus to be accomplished in Jerusalem. The exodus in Jerusalem. The exodus then would be his death. And toward the end of this chapter, it notes that Jesus resolutely took the road for Jerusalem to meet his fate. So he knew of his death, and he walked resolutely toward it. Now today's story, called the Transfiguration, is in the middle of the 9th chapter of Luke's Gospel. For most of our Sunday readings, it is helpful if you can see it in its context in the Gospel story, what happened before it, what happened after it. That certainly is true with today's reading. So I'd like to step back and see this reading in the context of all of chapter 9. Throughout Luke's Gospel, there is a curiosity about Jesus. Just who is this spellbinding storyteller and this amazing healer? Chapter 9 deals with this important question. And the question is raised for the first time by Herod. This is in verse 9 of chapter 9. Now this is Herod Antipas, who's a ruler in Galilee, a person who is deeply paranoid about any rivals to power. In this case, he is very concerned about this Jesus because he's popular with the crowds. And so Herod says in verse 9, "Who is this Jesus about whom I am hearing reports?" And the reports that Herod is hearing are stories about Jesus' preaching and healing ministry. Now that's verse 9. 9 verses later, in verse 18, Jesus himself raises this same question to his disciples. He says, "Who do the crowds say that I am? And who do you say that I am?" And the answer that Peter gave to Jesus was, "You are the Messiah." So that is answering both Herod's question and Jesus' question. You are the Messiah. In response to Peter's naming Jesus as Messiah, Jesus then predicts twice his arrest and execution. But between these two predictions, there occurs the Transfiguration, today's gospel story, that was witnessed by 3 of the disciples. So you have naming Jesus as Messiah, a prediction of Jesus' death. They go to the mountaintop, the glorification, the Transfiguration, and then they come back down, and it is again predicted, his coming death. The rich symbolism of this mysterious event on the mountaintop then is placed between two predictions of his shameful death, his execution, to show that his death will not destroy him, rather he shall be raised in glory. Now the presence of Moses, the great lawgiver, and Elijah, the great prophet, identifies Jesus solidly within Israel's tradition. In other passages of the ancient scriptures, the bright cloud is a sign of the presence of God. In today's gospel story, a voice within this cloud says, "You are my chosen son, listen to him." This story of Jesus' transfiguration is, as we have noted, placed between two predictions of Jesus' disgraceful death on the cross as a prediction of his resurrection. Jesus' shining face and his dazzling clothes suggest that death will not be the final word of his story. All of this is very puzzling to the disciples who were there to witness it, and only later will they begin to understand its meaning. And so it is with us. We too are puzzled when confronted with the mystery of death and resurrection. Today's gospel uses 3 words to describe the reactions of the disciples. The words are awakened, listen, and silence. This story tells of the disciples being awakened from sleep. The story is meant to awaken us as well to Jesus' true identity. The voice from the bright cloud calls him the chosen Son. This voice awakens us. And the voice goes on to tell the disciples on the mountaintop and us disciples here below to listen to him. So we've been brought to this mountain to be awakened and to listen. Today's text says that the disciples are silent. The reason for their silence is that they are not yet fully awakened to the great mystery of who Jesus really is. This person, Jesus, that Peter has called Messiah, and the voice in the cloud has called chosen Son. They can't fully grasp it. In the events following the Transfiguration event, we can see that the disciples are still asleep. Here, after following the shocking prediction of his death, and then the astonishing transfiguration, the disciples have a petty argument in verse 45 about which one of them is the greatest. And so you can see they're still asleep. And so it is with us. The full awareness of the meaning of Jesus, the Messiah, will dawn on them only as the events of his passion, death, and resurrection unfold, and then finally with the coming of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. Only then will they become awakened more fully, and only then do they break their silence. Now, even with these events unfolding before them and the coming of the Holy Spirit, they are not fully awakened. That happens only when we are in glory, that we will become fully awakened to the meaning of Jesus the Messiah. This passage, through death to resurrection, is called the Paschal Mystery. It is at the very heart of our Christian faith. And it's not just a passage that Jesus has taken, it is our journey as well. Archbishop Oscar Romero knew he was the primary target of the military death squads in El Salvador, and he foretold his death as well as his transfiguration. He said, "If they kill me, I will rise up in the Salvadoran people." Death, he knew, would not be the final word of his story, nor is it the final word of our story. Meanwhile, on this mountaintop of today's gospel, we are struggling with sleep and understanding. We are only partially awakened to this mountaintop epiphany of Jesus in glory, and we continue to struggle to understand who he is for us. And that is why we need to revisit this mountaintop from time to time, to look again into the transfigured face of Jesus, and we need to hear again the voice from the cloud saying, "Listen to him." Our Sunday Eucharist is meant to be a sort of weekly trip to the mountaintop to behold the face of Jesus, the chosen Son, and to listen to him. Awakened by this weekly epiphany, we are invited to walk daily in the company of the Lord and to listen to him. As we become more and more aware of the meaning of Jesus, then we can break our silence and speak to others about how the Lord has transfigured our lives.